everybody. Welcome to the American Space Museum's Apollo Gallery at downtown Titusville, Florida, just out the back gate of Kennedy Space Center. I'm Fred Haise, coming to you safe and sound from my home in Houston, Texas. And I'm here today to help you stay curious.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you, Fred Haise. I'm Mark Marquette, where we brought you this Stay Curious program as part of our pandemic outreach to keep our wonderful nonprofit American Space Museum on the map. In the upper left, you see Charlie Mars. Yes, just like the candy bar or the planet. He is our wonderful, call him the Godfather in a happy way, that is our chairman of the board of directors and the force behind this museum with other people the last 20 years. And Fred Haise, Apollo 13 NASA astronaut, has obviously helped us quite a bit with our museum. And we're going to talk about that because today we're celebrating an Independence Day holiday with this great American, Mr. Fred Haise. We certainly thank you for joining us and helping everyone stay curious. And to your service to our country, I wave the flag to you, sir. All right. And because this is the American Space Museum, and we've discovered by doing this program that there's hardly any more diverse of a government agency than NASA, or for the world that matters. We're 41 people from different countries. 41 countries can say they've had people go to space. And Fred Haise is one of 366 people that can, or 566 people that can say that. So before we get into Mr. Haise, we want to just say that this is our silver lining to be doing things like this for you during this COVID-19 pandemic. And we're blessed to have so many enjoying our American Space Museum outreach to the space-loving community. And we know we will have a big show today with some first-time people joining the American Space Museum. We've been closed since March 17th. But and we're probably going to be closed maybe until the first part of August, because we are being very cautious with our volunteers. And we'll ask Mr. Haise about his nonprofit that he's involved with, the Infinity Museum. But while we won't skip over the successful failure of Apollo 13, we will focus on other aspects of this great American's long life. So welcome again, Mr. Haise. And I wanted to mention that your nickname is Fredo, not Freddie. Why don't you tell us about that?
I really don't know who gave me that Fredo nickname. I guess it really didn't come about till I was in the astronaut program. I didn't have it before as a NASA test pilot at either Lewis Research Center or Edwards. And maybe it carried on from like Gordo. From the original 7.
Yep, Gordo.
Yeah, it's thought to be, so you ought to have some kind of a nickname. And of course, I ended up flying Enterprise with Gordo Fullerton.
Right. That's interesting.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, well, you look great. You know, we hope your family's doing well. Charlie is live with us here. We wanted to let people know that you two have been friends for a long time, and Charlie will talk about that. You, of course, Mr. Haise, were part of what John Young joked as the original 19 back in 1966. And you look great. I wanted to show our friends here. You've posted on Facebook that you got a nice little haircut from one of your granddaughters there the other day.
Right. Yeah, that's what dog shears with a number 3 attachment on it.
A number 3 dog shears, and you look marvelous.
Yeah.
And what's your granddaughter's name?
Her name is Madison. We call her Maddie.
Maddie. So how is it like to be Grandpa Fredo? How many grandkids you have, and how's your life?
Well, actually, I go deeper than that now. I have 2 great grandchildren.
All right.
So anyway, both boys. To one of the grandchildren, Cade Woodall. So that's the first of the great grandchildren.
Well, there she did it. She did a good job cutting your hair. You are a Facebook person and posted that on Facebook, and I'm sure that made a lot of people smile. But here's how we think of you. Of course, in your Apollo suit there, and we are going to talk here a little bit about, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie a little bit, because one thing that we have here at the American Space Museum that's unique is the Space Walk of Fame. And many of you have been to downtown Titusville and seen the hands on there. And Marty, I'm going to switch to, I was out there yesterday, Fred, and photographed your hands on our Apollo monuments that are a tribute to space workers. And there you see, for our fans out there, there's like 16 of these pylons. I'll let Charlie talk about it. These are space workers here, and there's a couple grummies on there. And then, of course, I had to do the laying of the hands on Fred Haise, okay, yesterday. And we have about the same hand size, okay, which is unusual because a lot of your astronaut compatriots have very small hands. We noticed that. But Charlie, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about you and Fred, about how you met each other and how these hands were harvested a little bit, Charlie.
Fred and I met in Bethpage, I think, originally, when we were up there helping with the acceptance of the lunar modules. And of course, Kennedy, for all of the manned programs, we were asked by JSC, as we had the checkout experience and checkout teams, to go and be a part of that acceptance test. So we were for Mercury, Gemini, Command Service Module, Lunar Module, different parts of Skylab, as well as Shuttle. So it was something we had been used to, something we enjoyed. And from then, Fred and I have been running into each other on and off different times, different places. Obviously, the lunar module processing at Kennedy. And then when we got into the shuttle program, we had a team. I did not go, but Bob Seek and a team were out with the ALT test and were a part of that, and got to see Fred and the other guys with the drop test. Then when Space Station Freedom, which most people on the net don't know what that is, was first coming about in Reston, Virginia, Fred was head of the Grumman office up there. So here again, we were back working another program. But it's on and off. We're kind of like fly paper to fly, and I'm not sure which is which. We've been that way. And along the lines, when we finally got off and started on the monuments at Space View Park, I got roped in to get a lot of the astronaut handprints and clay, which we turned into bronze. And Fred was instrumental, by the way, and it's probably okay now to say where I got a lot of those names and numbers. But at the time, we tried to keep it a little bit quiet. But there was 43, including the 2 Russian cosmonauts. And you can see
there you're doing Fred's hands. Talk about getting Fred's hands and why you got an old sledgehammer there, this picture here.
Well, Fred came to the house there in Titusville, and you can see the clay in the one picture there, and then the one to the right. I'm using a sledgehammer to get his handprints deeper into the clay. And I don't think I hurt his knuckles too much with that. But that effort of 43 handprints, what I thought would take maybe 6 to 9 months, ended up being 2.5 years. But here again, Fred was instrumental in helping me track down all of those astronauts.
Fred, Charlie's wrote a nice manuscript of his harvesting the handprints that
Right.
is quite interesting.
Traveling. I think
you remember that day?
I say Charlie did a lot of traveling. I think Sam Beddingfield went with you, Charlie, a few times.
He did.
And it really was, obviously you weren't government paid for those trips. So it was really a personal sacrifice to get.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah. Awesome. And this is now we'd like to say it's one of the unique places. Well, Fred, have you ever had handprints done anywhere else is what I want to ask you. We think that we're unique, one of the few places in the world. Have you ever seen this anywhere else? Zoom in on the handprints.
I think we did one at Disney, but I don't know what happened to them. I don't think they're ever displayed. And I did a footprint at Stennis. Just a foot. It was actually a fake thing because they let me use a lunar boot for the footprint, which obviously I never got to wear.
Well, I've been to Stennis, I've been there, and that was out at the Welcome Center, right?
Right.
And
Yes,
there's
sir.
a dog print on it, isn't there?
What's that?
No, you just put a boot print. I was thinking there was a dog print with it.
No, it
It's
was
just a boot print.
Yeah.
And that has all been moved to the Infinity Museum we're going to talk about in a minute. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I was there about 3 years ago, and thoroughly. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the handprints of these astronauts, the ones that Charlie and other people couldn't harvest because they passed away. There's beautiful bronze sculptures there. A plaque that Sandy Storm, the sculpture person, did them, and it's quite a thing, Charlie, that you all did. A true living monument to space workers and our astronauts there. So we of course, that's open. It's an outdoor thing. And but we wanted to talk a minute about, so great, visit our Space View Park. We feel those hands are very neat. I've seen at the LBJ Ranch in concrete are the handprints of Glenn Shepard and Gus Grissom. And when LBJ, President Johnson, had visitors at his ranch, he didn't have them sign a guest book. He had them put their handprints in cement, and he called them friendship stones. Yeah, and so it's quite an interesting thing. Have you been there, Fred, being in Texas?
No, I've not. I did see, you mentioned it. I did see that posted on Facebook. Somebody had visited there and posted. I did not realize that was done.
Yeah, the LBJ Ranch in outside of Austin is really a neat place. So, but we're talking about space here and our nonprofits, and we wanted to have a little bit a plug for both of our nonprofits. I want Fred to tell us a little bit about the Infinity Museum, but I'm gonna say that we have at the American Space Museum, those of you who don't know about it, that Mr. Mars is our board chair and been involved in it for some 20 years. We have a wonderful organization under the leadership of Executive Director Karen Conklin and the chairman of the board, Charlie Mars. And we are blessed with a staff of volunteers and a few paid employees who are very passionate about preserving the birth of the space age. And in my opinion, we have one of the founding fathers of the space age here with us today to help you stay curious, Mr. Fred Haise. We're also a proud Brevard County nonprofit, and the American Space Museum, our parent foundation is the U.S. Space Walk of Fame. And we're focused on the American space worker like no other museum I've seen, and our STEAM education programs are designed to ignite the future generation of space workers. So if you do wish to help us, we have several charitable means, and we've got this, zoom in on this so you can see the places you could contact us to help us out, because Mr. Haise, it was no small job for you guys to get the millions of dollars at the Infinity Museum. And tell us a little bit about that place, please, sir.
Well, Infinity came about from the 9/11 tragedy in New York. After that, of course, the security requirements grew for all government type facilities, and virtually it put the Cosmosphere, which was a very small museum out at Stennis Space Center itself, literally put it out of business, because before they allowed cars. People could drive out and park and visit that small museum, but all at once that was prohibited. And NASA tried to salvage it by putting a small building at the Mississippi State Welcome Center and provide some busing, the kind of bus sizes like for rental cars at airports, using those type buses to bus people out. But that was not working. They really never could get their attendance back up. So the idea sprung really by three people, Roy Estes, who had been a director of Stennis many years, as well as short time was director of Kennedy Space Center, and Mr. Leo Seal, who was the president of the largest bank in South Mississippi, and Myron Webb, who was at that time, I think, head of public affairs at Stennis, hatched the idea of building this facility, if you want to call it off-site. It actually is a cross I-10 from where the Stennis Gate is, and well, on 18 acres that was provided for this not-for-profit that was formed. With the first chairman was Mr. Leo Seal, and I was an initial board member, and Roy Estes and a number of other local people. We decided to build this museum. And of course, the challenge was initially we had plans we were going to raise $40 million, $41 million. We got to about 32.5 and decided to go ahead with the building, which is what we did. And I spent some time scrounging, kind of like Sergeant Bilko in that old TV show, scrounging things from almost every NASA center, from Marshall, from Kennedy. I got a lab, a full-scale lab from Kennedy. I got from Johnson Space Center to kind of fill, call it roughly, not what we really wanted to do eventually, but to get it started, that's to fulfill the space gallery upstairs. It's the upstairs gallery. But the biggest gallery actually was what we call the Earth Gallery, which was to tell a story ultimately when we got the, what we assumed at the time would require about $9 million to build the interactive type exhibits in the Earth Gallery to tell about hurricanes, wetlands, pollution, things like that. We had to just put in there helter-skelter or whatever we could get a hold of. And the lady that headed the chairman of the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville loaned us a large exhibit. It was and it pretty well filled 3/4 what we call the space gallery, and a little area in the front, and that tells about exploration, what the countries have gained really in populations from exploring. From the time of way back with the Phoenicians forward to the modern day. And we had that on loan for over 2.5 years from Dr. Barnhart, who was the leader then at Marshall. So anyway, that's how we got started, and that's now about 5.5 years ago. We have grown, obviously, in various means of funding. A big bonus was actually a fallout of the BP oil spill, where we garnered out of that about $9 million in the restoration funds.
Oh, wow.
And that allowed us to really complete most of the Disney design, actually, interactive exhibits we had in mind to put in the Earth Gallery. And so that got us, today I'd say, plus another grant exhibits we've gotten from the US Navy and one, and from NOAA. Have pretty well fit us up pretty much the way we originally intended with the facility. It's about a 72,500 square foot facility at this point.
Well, it's fabulous. I've been privileged to be there. I love the hurricane exhibit. That's kind of cool. And they have your training Apollo suit up there that looks like someone had drug it behind a car down an alley for
actually that training suit is Neil Armstrong's.
Oh, it is. All right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. The spacesuit I flew, unfortunately, it looks way too clean. It didn't get much cylinder dust on it. It's on exhibit. But no, a fellow, one of the suit techs called me from Johnson and said, I got this old thing that was just thrown in the back of a closet somewhere at Johnson. That was Neil's training suit. So I said, yeah, we'll take it. And so that's the training suit you see there.
Am I right? It's pretty chewed up.
It is. I don't know
You
if the
guys
rats
digging-
got to it.
And I think you have a big black Apollo 15 rock there, one of the bigger moon rocks I've seen.
Right.
And it's a fabulous thing. It's right on Interstate 10 at the Mississippi-Louisiana border. Of course, Mr. Haise was born in Biloxi. We got to get that plug in there for you. And but Charlie, what do you want to add about our wonderful nonprofit and your involvement with it?
Well, if you compare what Fred had available and had to do, we are a way lot smaller than that. We pretty much had most of the things that are in our museum were brought to us by people, both NASA and contractor there in the Kennedy area. And every now and then, somebody who had moved away would hear about us, and when we come back, they'd bring it. Some of the things that we did get were through Ransom Road, which is a repository that JSC and some of the other centers, when they end up at the end of a program, they send it out, it goes through the state, ends up at Ransom Road. And even though the shuttle consoles didn't end up there, they were a part of the surplus program, but they were basically abandoned in place in the firing rooms. But we went through the proper channels and headquarters, and it took about 3 months to get those, but it was well worth it. As you know, you're sitting right by those consoles. But we were on a lot smaller budget. We were basically a different goal, and that goal was, as you mentioned earlier, not only to honor and keep in memory the astronauts for all the different programs, but to honor the space workers that put them there and brought them back. And even though most of those are out of Kennedy, we do have some that have come in from Marshall as well as JSC. But Apollo, I think it is strictly, I don't remember seeing any in Apollo other than KSC and one or two of the astronauts like Jack Lausma. He sent me $100. He says, I want to know be known as a worker, not just an astronaut. So we've got his handprints and his name, plus his name is in one of the little plaques on Apollo. But as Fred knows, it got to be a chore on numerous occasions. And there was a time or two that you just say, is this all worth this? Is it ever going to be where we really want it? But perseverance does pay off. And in Fred's case, there's been a lot of times where perseverance has probably done him a lot more good than most. And I'd like to talk about, not me, but him, a few of those. And obviously Apollo 13 was the one that was most publicized. But then there was also the incident with the Confederate Air Force. And then there was his survival with his dog there in his fishing camp when one of the hurricanes came through. And I'm sure you want to ask him about those things.
Absolutely. All right. Well, good. We're going to move from there to Marty. Zoom in on this a second here. Here's another picture of Fred there in his Apollo thing, and that allows me to put this here and show you. There's Marty, our cameraman, Marty Winkle, and over here on this side's Bruce Jacobs. They're behind the scenes right now. I wanted just a shout out to them because we couldn't do it without them. Marty Winkle worked on the lunar modules, LM7 that Fred flew. He was the electrical engineer. Marty's got a microphone. He might chime in a little bit there, Fred. And Bruce is a NASA IT manager. And this has been, he was with USA and Grumman, okay. And we're a big team here with our other staff members. Some of you see their names there. And we're really enjoying bringing this to you. To segue into Apollo 13 itself, here's a beautiful picture. Fred, 50 years later, this is of course Apollo 13. You'd have to be, everybody knows that. And you had all these celebrations planned, including several here at the Kennedy Space Center. And this is when you see 50 years later, they're still working with photos that you took. This was a very enhanced image of you in Odyssey. Just comment a little bit about the reunions being postponed because of the COVID crisis, and still some of the celebrations, like you see this picture. What does that make you think about, sir? Well,
Obviously, the celebrations to me weren't so much really Apollo 13's 50th anniversary, but it was obviously the thing that we could put them on. And again, at many not-for-profits, most of these were scheduled, we were going to have our second gala for Infinity Science Center. And Astronaut Scholarship Foundation had one planned. The Marshall Space Flight, the U.S. Space and Rocket Center had one planned. Cradle of Aviation in New York, and all of these, as Charlie and I know, for not-for-profits are great for fundraising. And so I hated to see those deferred mainly from that account, rather than me remembering 50 years ago, which I've gotten to remember a lot of times over the 50 years with talks at to various sorts of events. No, Apollo 13 obviously enjoyed, call it the notoriety or being known through the movie that Ron Howard directed, Apollo 13. Now, incidentally, is celebrating its 25th year.
That's right. We wanted to ask you about that. Isn't that interesting?
Couldn't believe that movie came out 25 years ago. How time flies.
Well, here's the doll that came out. Marty, you pan out there, and this doll is it's actually from the movie. It says here, that doll I was showing earlier,
Right.
that you signed, a Kenner doll. And yes, 25. Can you believe it, Fred, that not just 25 years ago, 25 years ago this week was the release of this Ron Howard movie. A few little stats about it. It was released at 2,350 theaters. It cost $52 million to make, and it took in the box office $355 million on a $52 million. That $300 million profit's not too bad, is it?
Right.
In any business. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Where did you see the premiere?
I saw the premiere in kind of an old-timey theater in Houston. You know, one that still had balconies on the side and almost like for an opera, and a balcony in the back area.
Huh. What's the name of it? No red carpet? No paparazzi?
Old-timey theater, and it was set up, I guess, by Ron Howard, and Tom Hanks was there. And they invited all the mission controllers and any astronauts that could attend to this showing in Houston. I was not at a premiere in Hollywood. This was just a local thing for the part. Like I said, the parties were mission controllers and astronauts, and they got up front and did some explaining, and right away made the comment that this was not meant to be a documentary. That it was, you know, so they had to add some things for drama in the movie. You know, they knew us looking at it technically would probably find some things wrong or what would have done differently. And so they clarified it that way to then show the movie night. And so anyway, we had a reception afterwards and that kind of thing in a mixer. So that was my first time I saw the movie.
Well, they didn't make you pay admission, right?
No, we got in for free.
Good. Well, you have a good, you know, you talked endlessly about that. And the American Space Museum has a YouTube channel that you speak 18 years ago at an event that Charlie had. It was at Miracle Mile Mall, and it was a workers' reunion. And it's when all of you watching this on Facebook are done, you want to go to our YouTube and see this awesome talk, very informal, very informative that you gave. So, but you always have a good humor, and you sent this to our collections manager, Chuck Jeffrey. All right, the week of the oops, I'll just leave a note, says a UFO crashing into you, which we're going to take a few questions at the end, and we did not want to focus on Apollo 13, but Marty, we've got a question from an 8-year-old aspiring engineer. You said him or her, named Rook, R-O-O-K. And Fred, the question is from this 8-year-old aspiring engineer on Facebook: before you saw the damage on the capsule, were you expecting a little damage or a lot of damage?
Well, I really hadn't thought about what I would see. What I'll tell you, with us, we were all quite surprised, Jim Lovell and I and Jack, when we first got to see it, because the damage looked much more extensive than certainly I expected. Thinking back to the time of the explosion, we'd had the bang and the reverberation echoing through the metal hull of the vehicle. And some motion though, not like in the movie, but very slight motion and some thrusters firing to try to hold attitude. But it really didn't seem that big a bang or anything that would have caused what the extent of damage we saw, which literally was one quarter of the service module missing, and a lot of torn thermal blankets and some wiring hanging out loose here and there. So it was, you would have thought it had been and felt much more extensively to us in the vehicle than we had felt.
Interesting. Good, good. We're looking at here. Marty, chime in there and tell Fred what he doesn't want to. This is Marty had this done, and being chairman of all those Grumman reunions, he's asked you to have an autograph or two. Is on there. So some of the pictures you signed are on there. Marty's got a great display. The lower left-hand corner is the a very unusual picture of the LEM. LEM 7 there, getting ready to still be worked on at the high bay, right?
Yeah.
In the high bay, Marty.
Yeah, you're looking at the rear end there.
Sweet. And the MSOB, yes, I like saying that. That's in the MSOB, Charlie Mars. Of course, you could have told me that.
Or the ONC, the Operations and Control Building. That was a short name for it.
Yep. ONC, now it's called the Neil Armstrong Museum, or Neil Armstrong Building, right?
Right.
Right. Okay. Great. Well, good. Well, about the movie, Fred, 25 years ago, did you have much input into it? And when was the last contact you had with anyone in the movie?
Well, the only time I was involved at all was long before they started filming. Ron Howard and the assistant director and Tom Hanks, and Ron Howard incidentally brought his daughter along, visited me in an office in Titusville, and they had a set of questions they went through. That by that time they had obviously had Jim Lovell's book. NASA had given them the mission report, and they had the air to ground to listen to all the transmissions. And they just had a bunch of questions they went through to kind of get my reading maybe between the lines about things. And so that was the only time I actually had any direct involvement with those that produced it, except for one other short trip. The fellow who played me, Bill Paxton, when Ron came back, he came back a second time at Kennedy to try to figure out with some camera people where he was going to shoot some scenes around Kennedy Space Center. Then they handed him off to me to show around, and that's what I did. I gave him kind of a blue ribbon review of the space shuttle activity going on in the OPF and the VAB and out at the launch pad. I had hoped to impress him with that the job of getting the vehicle ready and flying wasn't a simple job. It took a lot of people, a lot of dedicated people to make it happen right, to impress him with that. It wasn't like Hollywood with Buck Rogers in the old days, Buster Crabbe back when he'd hop into that rocket when the P was in trouble on the Saturday serials and push one button and be off, get away from the bad guys. So I wanted to impress him because he was not a space person. Like Tom Hanks was actually quite knowledgeable. He was a space program follower. But Bill Paxton was not. So I did that. Sideline, I took him in the not quite finished space station building, assembly building. And we went actually underneath. They had some passageways underneath the floor where cable and I guess cable and some of the plumbing would be routed to come up to the various workstations when the space station parts came in for processing. And he looked at all of that and he uttered one, said, "Wow." He said, "This is where we should have filmed the aliens." So
that's cool.
That was his impression.
Good little story there. Good story there. Well, we're going to leave the Apollo 13 and move to something that I know is dear to your heart, the Space Shuttle approach and landing tests. And here I want to show a picture of Bob Seek a few years ago. Zoom in on that, Marty.
Right.
Because Fred, every time, Bob Seek, of course, has been our treasurer for many years, works with Charlie on the board. Just a tremendous guy. He did one of these with us. And he's always telling our collections manager, Nick Enix, get some alt stuff out there. We need more alt stuff in there, because talking to Bob Seek here, who launched 51 shuttle missions, he keeps telling us, I enjoy talking to him about how important the this was. And you were one of the commanders of 2 teams and on this, and it was to give a reference to our guests, basically all of 1977 you were involved in this, and we got some pictures to show here of it, but tell us a little bit about and I'm going to show you here. Here is your crew, the crew's in front of Enterprise, the shuttle that didn't go to space, but was named after the Star Trek Enterprise. Tell us about the whole program, and one thing that Bob Seek keeps talking about is a special time this one year for the people who went out there. There was kind of a NASA community that you guys set up at Edwards Air Force Base. And Bob fondly remembers his children being out there going to school and stuff like that. Well, what was it like for you, Fred?
Well, I described the program as a small program within the bigger program that was continued to go on to get ready for with Columbia and get ready to fly to space. My start in the program, I'll say that to me it was the highlight of my career. Actually, I look at that program in Enterprise because it didn't start with just getting ready to fly. I moved I left the astronaut office and went to work for Aaron Cohen for 4 years in the Orbiter Project Office. So I was more in the program management side through the development, early design development of shuttle. In fact, I was on the NASA, worked on the source selection board that selected the contractor to go build a shuttle, for instance. So I was there from day one. So that was a very enjoyable experience to be a part of that kind of business that I had not been as an astronaut. And I led the ops review design crew on all the design reviews through critical design review on Enterprise and through preliminary design review on Columbia before I got reassigned to go fly it. And so then I had the experience of all the early stuff you do with a new program, the invention, help invent flight plans, the checklist. Because with a new vehicle like that, it doesn't come with a book. You have to create the book. And the one side thing I did, and I thought about Kennedy, was Charlie mentioned being at Grumman, but no large group of Kennedy was ever full-time at the contractor plants at either North American Aviation or Grumman. They were there for certain key tests. And I thought this was an opportunity to get a lot of Kennedy people hands-on earlier than when the vehicle arrived, many of them with still a lot of holes and gaps and problems to work out in the vehicles that arrived at Kennedy, but to get them an earlier start on learning about shuttle if they came out and took part in the approach and landing test. And Charlie actually maybe remembers, he set up for me a meeting in the mission briefing room out at the Kennedy Space Center. And Charlie, I guess, corralled these people to attend this meeting where I gave a viewgraph show. And I was very, I won't say devious, but probably. I picked my viewgraph show with slides that showed beaches at Santa Monica, and I showed the nice mountain areas at the Tehachapis or the San Jacintos, and I never showed desert scenes except at dawn or dusk, because I knew that would be pretty bizarre to people trying to talk people into coming from Florida. But anyway, and I was surprised. I talked to Bob Sika not too long ago about who all came from Kennedy, and I was amazed at the number of people that did come and spent time. And I think that did, in fact, give them a little head start. Now, Columbia was a much more complicated vehicle than Enterprise. We didn't have a lot of obviously, any of the orbital systems, the propulsion systems, the environmental systems. So there was still some learning to do with Columbia when it arrived at Kennedy. But I think it did give people at Kennedy a head start in learning the vehicle more than they got in Apollo before those would arrive first at the Space Center. But it was an exciting program. It's really like an airplane test program, and run more like I had been involved with NASA for 7 years before I became an astronaut. And of course, it was an unusual configuration of flying on top of 747. People worried about that, about a collision as we came off. But as you're showing a picture now, the separation came off very cleanly. And the test program went very well. We finished it months short of what we thought we would take. We actually flew this first flight here, the release flight. It was within 2 weeks of a schedule that had been set 2 years before. So the orbital schedule didn't quite make it as on time, but on approach and landing test, this particular release flight was within 2 weeks of a schedule we'd set 2 years earlier.
Charlie, you had any recollections of the alt test?
And mainly, I know that it was a surprise to Bob Sink when he went out there. He was pulling his race car. He got a ticket because he didn't realize you had to have kind of permit or special tag to pull a race car. But from Fred's point, I remember when we discussed it one time in the first flight, which was a little tricky as far as Fred was saying, but because of that and because of some of the steering problems that they had, they were able, because of those flights and because of the one that Fred had first, was to go back and make changes to the orbiter on some of the steering mechanisms. Fred, you had something on that one, I'm sure.
Charlie, to back up, we had a question about your personal reaction to Apollo 13. And as one of the dealing with the lunar module checkout, somebody asked to hear your side of that.
Well, when I heard about it, it was my boss came to my house because he lived in the same neighborhood. And basically told us we had a problem, and we all immediately went back out to a little ready room that our boss, Ted Sassine, had. And on the way out there, not knowing anything about the lifeboat mode, Kennedy had never heard about that. And I actually thought I was going to listen to Fred die in space. And of course, that was not putting any of us in a good mood. Mm-hmm. And the more we listened to the command channel, which was Houston talking and was talking about the lifeboat mode, and we're all saying, what the hell is this? Mm. And when it finally came out that we understood what they were talking about, I became very confident because I knew how much time Fred had spent in a lunar module. And I said, if there's anybody that can pull this off, it's going to be Fred. And he did, along with help. But Fred's familiarity with that lunar module, I think, had a lot to do with some of the issues they had to overcome.
You knew it like the back of your hand, didn't you, Mr. Haise? Well, I think that gets exaggerated. I knew the vehicle in ways that you never really need to use in flight. I spent over a year at Grumman. I spent solid 7 months out of 1 year TDY in the plant. Very long hours with a very long test. Chasing, actually supporting technicians, opening cables, putting in breakout boxes, checking for opens or shorts and wiring, that kind of thing. So it's kind of stuff I knew about the LEM you would never ever have to use and wouldn't be capable of using in flight. So I think the thing that benefited me most probably was my just general knowledge I gained from all that testing of the vehicle. And that familiarity allowed me to get through the power up activity when we first had to power it up, and we had to do it fairly quickly to get the IMU alignment from the command module to allow me to skip steps that I knew just instinctively from knowing the vehicle we wouldn't need, and to get through it quicker. So I think that's probably the single most benefit I had of all of that LIM knowledge, was getting that activation done faster than I might have normally had I didn't have that background to enable us to get the platform aligned and now have a viable vehicle to operate then for the next 4 days.
Good. Well, that's yeah, it fills in the blanks there. Talking just a few more minutes about the alt approach and landing test of the shuttle that was done in 1977. Fred Haise, you flew 3 of the 5 free flights with Gordon Fullerton, 2 with the nail cone on and 2 with it off. And for our visitors out there, which picture have I got on here, Marty? I was looking for that pretty one of the, of course, the 747 took it up, like you mentioned, specially equipped, and you know, there's, like you said, there's concerns about hitting the tail cone and things like that. But they took you up to around 26,000, 30,000 feet, it looks like. And you were going to land, your top speed was around 300.
Yeah, roughly 30,000 feet. And by the time Fitz would push over and get to the right separation speed, they call SEP, we were down around 25,000 feet normally when we got off. It was a little lower actually with the tail cone off. I think those flights, the release point was more like 20,000 foot.
Yep. Yeah, looking at a little cheat sheet here. What a beautiful picture, huh, Fred, of the vehicles over the ocean there, or the ocean, over the mountains. And wanted to just show that there is an homage to it out there at the Houston Johnson Space Center.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you've had, tell us about that.
Yeah, the carrier aircraft is the real, the vehicle that flew those early flights. As you know, NASA eventually got a second 747 to support the ferry flights that were done throughout the space shuttle program. The orbiter on top, it looks pretty slick, but I think affectionately, originally it was called Woody.
Yeah,
and came from Kennedy Space Center. And of course, they went through a renaming contest and of course spruced it up.
It's called Woody?
Woody, yeah. I guess a lot of it's wooden. Is that right, Charlie?
Okay.
Is that right, Charlie?
That's the one that was out at the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation out on US 1 almost. It was set out there in the weather. You could go in it, but it wasn't much on the inside.
Yeah.
Yes, it was never one that was built by Rockwell. It was a model.
Here are the names of the pilots, I believe.
Now,
is that correct?
And I've complained, they do not have the original crews that flew those approach and landing tests. Those are more the people that flew the ferry flights later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Fitz Fulton, Skip Guidry, Vic Harden, and McMurtry were the 4 people in the 747 during those approach and landing test flights. There were 2 flight engineers and the commander and pilot. And they really took the big risk, incidentally. Point that out. We were sitting in ejection seats, Garda Fullerton and I. And had anything happened after separation, going out of control or vehicles colliding, we had a way out, secondary way out. They had a tunnel affair. It's something they could open and actually go out through the bottom. But if the vehicles were uncontrollable, the 747 crew would have not been able to escape. So to me, they took a lot more risk on those that first flight, worrying about separation than we did. I worried more about them than I did myself.
Huh.
Just a question you might address. Why did they fly with the tail cone off first before they took it off and flew it like it was going to be?
The tail cone on decreased the base drag, that blunt back end, which gave it a lot more drag. So it gave us more test time on the way down to do various maneuvers in the early flights. Like the longest flight, I think, maybe it was the first one at 5 minutes and 20 something seconds. But we had set to do planned maneuvers all the way down. Some were manually inputs to excite the dynamics in the vehicle to look at the control derivatives for analysis, compare against wind tunnel. And we had actually a program in the computer where you could just set it up and do a pro on the pro button, and it would wiggle the surfaces in a planned way to do the same thing through the computer. So those kind of things were done. We did a wind-up turn on flights 2 and 3, one with forward CG. Joe Engel and Dick Truly did that one with a wind-up turn of about 3 Gs. And then I did a repeat of that with the FCGs. We could reballast in the payload bay with weights to vary the center of gravity of the vehicle to look at it and across its range of center of gravity. The payload bay, incidentally, was half full with big banks of ammonia bottles and racks, because that was our cooling system.
Oh.
Normally, you know, in orbit, you had the payload bay doors open. And for entry, there's again, a small generator to get you through the heat of entry for cooling. But we were flying early flights, and to get up to altitude and everything, you know, an hour and a half flights. So there was a big bank of ammonia bottles in our payload bay to support the vehicle cooling.
Well, I'm going to show a picture here of the rollout, pan out just a little bit there, Marty, of Enterprise, and it had all the crew, all the cast members of Star Trek are there. Did you attend that?
Yes, that was what's called rollout.
Yeah, right.
You know, first comes out of the hangar or out of the plant or whatever, the traditional thing, and some speeches given, that sort of thing.
So you were there,
and because
but William Shatner wasn't there, was he?
What? No, Shatner was not there. But because of the name Enterprise, of course, that's what they took advantage of, and got some of the Hollywood stars off of Star Trek to show up for this event.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you were there, but Shatner wasn't there. Marty, I'd like you to pan out. Just curious, are there any pictures of you and Shatner in the same room together? Or anybody ever say that you look alike, in other words?
No, I didn't think about it. I was actually in a room with him, but a picture was not taken. I went to a large space event in England.
Uh-huh.
And,
well, you kind of both have aged beautifully, and you kind of look a little similar in there. So I'm wondering if, you know.
Yeah, there is some similarity.
Excuse me there. But anyway, there's that there. Enough of that fun there. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad to share the alt, and hope Bob Seek's happy, and I'm happy. I'm fascinated by that. Had to be a thrill to glide that thing down on Edwards Air Force Base, where, by the way, you were very familiar with Edwards Air Force Base as a test pilot for NASA, a research pilot, correct?
Right, yeah. Yeah, NASA called us research pilots because most of the things we did were not just to test the new basic design of the vehicle, but to take aircraft and modify them in certain ways to look at new facets that might improve safety, might improve performance. The exceptions being the X-15, of course, and the X-series aircraft. They were new specialized aircraft, but again, specialized to look at certain aspects of aerodynamics, like the swept wing or those sorts of things. They weren't planned to be production aircraft, like a military aircraft.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Well, we're winding up here, and appreciate your time and spending with us, and hope everyone's enjoying it out there in our Facebook world. We got Charlie Mars, NASA project manager on many important things like the lunar module. Charlie also was involved in Vandenberg, when they were going to convert that to shuttle use. Fred, were you involved with Vandenberg?
I was involved with it as a contractor.
Oh, that's right. You were, yeah, you worked for Grumman 16 years and
Right.
a NASA astronaut for 13. We wanted you to segue into your Grumman experience. You were out there.
When I left NASA in '79, I joined Grumman Corporation. The first few years I was at the main plant in operation in Bethpage on Long Island, New York. My only involvement with space programs at that time with hardware was we won a contract to build a little foot station that's perched on the end of the RMS arm that astronauts stood on, and it had a place you could actually hook up tools and that sort of thing. We built an emergency kit to close a payload bay door. There was a concern one time, a concern was expressed, what if a payload bay door got hung open, which obviously wouldn't be too good to enter. So we had a equipment on board that was devised that they could unhook the linkage and with a sort of I want to call it a pulley system to pull the payload bay door closed and tie it down. So entry would be possible. But that was the only direct hardware we had while I was there. One program that was already underway when I arrived at Grumman was building the wings for the shuttle. And all of the wings for all the shuttles that were built by Grumman. Rockwell provided the loads data from the wind tunnel and data. Grumman actually did the design and the fabrication of all the wings and delivered them for final assembly out at Palmdale, California.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Karen Conklin, our executive director, come in. She said, have him tell the story about your plane accident where you had to requalify later as an astronaut. And Charlie, you may know a little about that to chime in.
Yeah, I was flying with an operation that did air shows every year at various places, mostly in Texas, at Houston, Ellington Field, and up at Dallas Fort Worth. And kind of the theme of it was World War II and using World War II type aircraft that were active and could flyable, B-17s, B-24s, P-51s. And I was part of an act that was to represent the attack on Pearl Harbor. And the operation had inherited from 20th Century Fox, leftover, if you will, aircraft they had modified to look like Japanese aircraft. The Val, and the one I flew was a Val dive bomber, but they had converted some Canadian Harvards, which are like U.S. trainer T-6s, the old Texan, and S&Js in the Navy, but they converted it with Collins, new Collins, et cetera, to look like a Japanese Zero. And they took a BT-13, which was the Val I was flying, and modified another one with adding actually a fuselage section in to make it a little longer and made it into the Kate torpedo bomber. So we used those, and we had a B-17 involved, and we had a P-40 that was doing some dogfighting with the aircraft. And and had some fake pyrotechnics planted out in the field that would be set off at the proper time, representing dropping bombs or whatever. And I was actually ferrying the BT-13 from a crop duster's field at Angleton one day to Galveston to get it on a wash rack at Shoals Field at Galveston, Texas, to get it cleaned up for an air show that was coming up at Dallas Fort Worth. And I was flying on the wing of Ted Mendenhall, who was one of our shuttle training pilots in a Jap Zero. And we broke around the field, and I got too close on him on final and did a go around because I was afraid of overtaking him on the runway. And the engine quit. Was just climbing straight ahead at about 300 or 400 feet. And I didn't want to land straight ahead because that'd have put me in the Gulf. I was landing south, and I didn't want to go in the Gulf because I knew it was shallow water. If you go in an airplane, this is a fixed gear airplane. I couldn't raise the gear. So it's very likely it would have flipped over. If you're facing that, you want to be in deep water, so you swim out from underneath. So I succeeded in making a 180 turn to get over to the west side of the field, which it turned out was rougher than I had planned, but it was part of the where they're starting a housing project area. And the thing cartwheeled, ended up going flipping, wing dug in, upside down.
Whoa.
Now going backwards, and came to a stop, and it was on fire. So I had the canopy was jammed shut. I was laying on it, so I had to kick a hole in the canopy to get out. And then from there, I was met by sheriffs who were also a part of the operation. So they got the word, and so I had a sheriff's escort with the ambulance to the hospital, and got to spend the next 3 months in the burn ward of the University of Texas Hospital at Galveston, Texas. I had 65% burns, half third, half second. Now Charlie visited there once, and he made a nice award. Was it Burnt Caterpillar Award, Charlie? I think it was. Yeah, he gave me a Burnt Caterpillar Award that a lot of people had signed from Kennedy. Yes, just sort of sick humor maybe, but it was this kind of thing you do to cheer people up. One fellow I had kidded about aircraft accident he had in a T-38, one of the NASA pilots. He showed up with a big thing where he had a saying on it was, "Haise, you can't even commit Harry successfully."
Well, what I've learned about Charlie Mars, I don't know if he's a wonderful guy, but he seems to be a little bit of a practical jokester in your Apollo era there. He's included some of his legendary things in his little manuscript he's working on. What do you have to comment about the little joker there?
Well, Charlie gave out other than awards to a lot of them to people. What was it called? The TS Award, Charlie?
The DS, yes.
Oh, DS Award.
The DS,
Dumb
S Award.
other, yeah.
The Dumb S Award, right?
Yes.
Fred, were you in on the meeting that Charlie called and he didn't show up? You remember that story, Charlie?
Yeah, he signed, I got a DS award out of that one as well. But that's a meeting we used to get with the crew. And this was the NASA engineers who did all the tests. We'd have a meeting late just before launch, and we'd go over with the crew from each system, anything we thought was a peculiarity during the process, just to make sure that we had everything out on the table. And I would normally set those meetings, and for the Apollo 13 crew, because Lovell signed it. And I sat in the training building. Well, all of the astronauts knew the training building was where the simulators were. All the NASA guys knew the training building was where we did our training back over by the headquarters building. Well, and I took the day off. So we had the astronauts sitting in one building and the NASA guys sitting in another, waiting for somebody else to show up. So I think it was probably Fred or one of those guys created a DS award that they sent me and all signed, that I had very adroitly set this meeting up and then planned not to be there that day. They thought I did it on purpose, but I didn't.
The Dumb S Award. Yes, I've seen a lot of little certificates, Fred, and things in our museum that crosses your eyes, and you go, wow, these guys had a lot of fun, as well as a challenging career. Anything stick out to you that was a practical joke, Fred?
No, not. We had things in our check. You're talking about like flight. We had things in our checklist. In fact, some I didn't get to see, obviously, like the lunar surface checklist.
Right.
People had put in to make fun. I did that as a backup crew on 8 and 11. Helped with the support crew to figure out things to put in there for the crew. To find in their checklist or their flight plan or whatever, to sort of a little joke thing, hoping that things were going well.
Right. Well, we're coming to an end here, like I said, and one constant theme is how freely you give of your time, Mr. Haise. In fact, Marty Winkle's been involved with you in these Grumman reunions down here. And he says you're the first astronaut there, the last one to leave, and one that is always willing to have a picture made with them. And I know a lot of our people out there watching this today have met you and have autographs and so forth. And Charlie, your comment about his freely giving his time over the years to our museum, please.
One thing sticks out. He's always been there for our astronaut dinners until just recently, and we've had some issues there. But the thing that comes most to mind is the one that you mentioned earlier, and that was at Miracle City Mall when Fred gave a talk there. Now, before the talk, we had our museum also in there, and Fred spent 2, maybe 3 hours signing, and had our dinner. And Fred did his talk, and Fred may remember we had 3 engineers, me being one of them. We couldn't get the DVD playing on the TV. And I got Jack Light and Jack Winkler, who was a technician, to come and fix it for us. And when it went on to blank again, Fred was very poised, said, "Charlie, don't try and help." So, but after the dinner, there was a few people didn't have signatures, and Fred went right back down there and signed for another hour. So I can always look back, and there was never anything that we ever asked Fred to help us with that he didn't. As a matter of fact, it was through his efforts, and I had been working to finish the Apollo Monument, and he got us a $10,000 donation from Tom Hanks and his wife. So that we even put his name on the monument, Fred. So Tom Hanks's name is on as one of our contributors, which was due to Fred.
No, I tell you, over the years, of course, I'm very interested in aviation, where I started. I've always enjoyed visiting myself and museums of those sorts, aviation and space. And I really feel they contribute not just educationally to people who visit, and children in particular, but I think there's an excitement more about that type of museum, that particularly for young people. You know, you can go to a natural history museum and look at a stuffed buffalo or a prehistoric animal, but certainly it's educational in that sense. But I don't think it's as exciting as what you see in aviation and space museums, and about what has been done or what can be done to you know, excite the minds, and particularly I hope young people that will be interested and carry on in the future endeavors in the same and enjoy the same experience Charlie and I have had in that business.
Well, and though our museums are very different financial wise, we share that same goal together. And there's a lot of wonderful space museums in our country. One of them, Fred Haise, is at the Cosmosphere in Kansas, where your Apollo 13 command module rests, and you were going to have in Hutchinson, Kansas, and you were going to have an event there that's been postponed. And your LM-7 Grumman-made lunar module is orbiting the sun. You ever think about that, where Aquarius is?
No. Aquarius is somewhere and came apart. You're thinking of Apollo 10.
Yeah, okay.
Apollo 10's limb is missing in action somewhere in out toward the sun.
Well, I do have that mistake, but 13 blew up. I mean,
our limb we jettisoned a very short time before entry.
Oh, okay.
We jettisoned the surface module first, and the limb, because we had to use it, Lovell was still in it till then, do communication and attitude control. So it was only after we got the command module powered up that we separate the limb. So it ended up in the Pacific Ocean. And that was one of the aspects of where they picked to splash down, because it still had the nuclear cast. The RTG that was going to power the ALSAT package on the moon. And the AEC got into it and asked NASA if they could put it in a very deep area of the Pacific Ocean. So that partly shaped, again, the return path and where
really
it picked to splash down. so that RTG, which they felt would survive entry, would end up in a deep part of the Pacific Ocean.
A radioisotope energy source there for
Right.
people who don't know what that is. Okay, well, I turned a wrong thing into some educational thing there. I was mixed up with 10. Well, we're gonna end this interview. Charlie had mentioned how you are such a survivor. You're in your 80s like Charlie. You survived being a research pilot. You survived that private crash in Apollo 13. But Charlie said there was a hurricane and a dog involved that was a close call for you. Why don't you share that?
It wasn't a close
That with us.
I had a small place on the bayou in Mississippi, not too far from Biloxi, where I grew up, Mary Walker Bayou. And Katrina happened back in 2005. And it had a Cat 10, I'll call it, tidal wave surge. And that actually pushed enough water up the Pascagoula River about a mile and a half, and then up the bayou another 3/4 of a mile, to put 3 foot of water in the place I was staying in. I was the only one that stayed in that 1 block street I was on with a dog. It really wasn't any danger, but it was kind of sad because I got to watch the water rise and slowly come in the back and front doors to put 3 foot of water in the house. Now, fortunately, I had a loft, small loft area, and that's where the dog and I spent the next 3 days till we could get out of the place. But I was
3 days. What's your dog's name and what kind?
That was a Dream, a misnomer because that was a vicious little dog. And it was a half Chihuahua, half mini Schnauzer.
Oh, that's an interesting.
It was not
in
a
3 days. You were actually marooned in the attic of this house, huh?
Well, my car was gone, but one neighbor came back, Marty, who lived across the street. He's a bachelor, and we actually made out with the National Guard. The Alabama Guard showed up, and they were handing out MREs, meals ready to eat. And I had actually stockpiled a bunch of water and peanut butter and the stuff you could live off of, beans. Mm-hmm. And so I actually wasn't too bad off from that aspect, but made myself useful and ripped out the first joint of sheetrock throughout the house, first 48 inches during that 3 days, and just threw it out in the front yard because I was worried about mold because I knew it'd be wetted behind that. And so I got ahead of the game that way, and never did suffer mold or whatever residue from getting everything wet. But it took almost a year to get on the lineup of the right workers to fix it back up. So I lived in that fishing hangout without an inner wall for almost a year.
And that was Katrina. Well, we're at the end here. We're going to take a few questions. You've been so gracious with your time. Charlie, do you have something you want to add with your good friend, Fred Haise there?
That's all for now. Let's just see what questions people have for it.
Okay. I've got a question, Fred, and that is when Mattingly was changed 2 days before the mission, when did they redo all the photos? Did they ask you 2 days before you launched to bother you for a photo shoot to put Swigert in there, or was that after the mission?
No, we did that after the mission. That is wasn't time to do that kind of worry about that kind of thing.
That's what
we went back into I'll call it training with Jack when that decision was made, at least to go through I'll call it critical phases like launches, entries, rendezvous, to make sure that even though we used the same set of books, checklist, same flight plan, prime or backup, to go fly the flight, we worried about how things were discussed mutually among the crew, where there needed to be teamwork, that we were on the same sync with Jack. So we were actually in a simulator about 8 o'clock the night before launch.
Wow.
Where normally the day or two before launch, you normally took off and went to the beach house. There was a house at Kennedy you could go to that had no phones even, that you could relax, just sort of leaf through your flight plan or checklist or whatever, take it easy. And so we were busy in a checklist till that night before launch.
Okay, we've got another question from Robert Law, who watches us from Scotland almost every show, Fred, and he's asking, would you have liked to have had an orbital flight on a shuttle?
I would have liked to have had an orbital flight, and just from that experience, but I really the schedule was slipping. When I decided to leave the program, I knew we were probably 2 years out to the first flight, and obviously I'd have stayed if I'd have got the first flight, but but at any rate, I had the opportunity to join Grumman. And my longer range plan was to get involved as an aerospace executive, a manager, and I just didn't want to pass up that opportunity. I had a flight scheduled, the third flight, STS-3, and if the mission had not changed, I probably would have hung on to do that mission. We were gonna, Jack Lausma and I were tentatively scheduled to go rescue Skylab.
Oh.
And so we were gonna fly up and
Ooh.
first rendezvous, carry a small kick stage, which actually was pretty well along. It was past this critical design review with Martin and Denver. And Jack was going to we just would rendezvous and park off, a few hundred feet. And Jack would remotely fly from that F payload base station in the orbiter. He would remotely fly that little vehicle over and dock it to Skylab. And then our mission would be over, really, from that standpoint, and we'd just get clear of the area, and people under the ground would command Skylab to which orientation it needed to be, and actually they would fire the rocket to either deorbit it or boost it higher, depending on, that would be more people above our pay grade that decided which of that to do and execute it. So our mission would be over with the docking of the kick stage.
Fascinating. How many of you knew that? STS-3 would have maybe saved Skylab had they stayed on. These alt tests were in 1977, and with April 1981, almost 4 years from new testing. Yeah, you can't sit around and wait when somebody like Grumman wants you involved there. Fascinating. Somebody else asked, what was your biggest disappointment about Apollo 13?
Well, obviously at the time, and it was sickening right away when I realized we had lost Tank 2 and knew we had an abort, because I'd worked through 2 previous training assignments. And Apollo, as a backup, you trained pretty much equally the same time as a prime. You did all the work to go fly the mission, which turned out to be good in case of the change out we did. And so you did all the work and then got to watch somebody else go fly. And I did that in case of Apollo 8 and 11. I was Bill Anders back up on 8 and Buzz Aldrin's back up on 11. And so here was my big chance after I'd worked through 2 training cycles. And in the flash, it was gone when we lost that oxygen tank. So I was really sick to my stomach almost with disappointment. That continued for some while after the mission, but I was happy within a month about after the flight, 6 weeks, a month, 6 weeks, Deke gave me another job and made me backup commander to John Young on Apollo 16. And at that time, and naively, I thought that we would continue flying through 19. At that time, that was still in the books. They're going to be last flights. So we flew, we cycled every 3 flights. So if you add 3 to 16, I would have got to fly 19. So I really had hopes I would get the second chance.
As a commander?
Yeah, as commander, right.
Where would that have landed?
What's that?
Where would that have landed? Schroeder's Valley, or?
They had not settled on the landing. They had several candidate spots for those last missions, 18 and 19, but they had not settled on what the actual landing spot would be.
Well, good. We're going to say thank you, Fred Haise, for joining us for over an hour here. Charlie Mars, your friend, You guys want to say goodbyes to each other?
Yep.
We-
Hopefully I'll see you here in a few months, Charlie, if this thing
Hey.
don't get canceled a second time, and I'll be down your way.
And we appreciate you helping us, Fred Haise, help everyone that watches and loves our museum, helping them stay curious. And we hope everybody has a safe 4th of July. And until we want to see you in our museum and go to the Infinity Museum. And until then, we thank astronaut Fred Haise, NASA manager Charlie Mars. And until we bridge the space between us again, I say goodbye and have a happy 4th of July, everybody.
All right. Same to you.